Hello, family. I'm Janaya Future Khan, and this is Dark Woke. Just before we begin, I want to say thank you to all the listeners out there, and a special shout out to all the supporters of the show. It truly means the world to me. If you'd love to become a supporter, we're going to have the Patreon link in the write-up below. Okay, today's episode marks the 2-year anniversary since October 7th, 2023. Okay, so we've had 2 years since one of the most political, lightning rod generational moments of our life. We can't unknow what we know now, right? 2 years since the entire Western world became aware of what is most often understood as the Israel-Palestine conflict. Now, if you are familiar in any regard with what has been happening in that region of the world, with what has been happening in the Middle East, you know, right, that that's not an accurate framing. Right? You don't need to be a foreign policy expert to know even how that particular moment, right, the particular moment in time, October 7th, you don't need to be an expert to know that it wasn't some singular, siloed event. Oh, no. It was the result of decades and decades and decades of injustice. That's what we're going to be unpacking now. But I want to be clear about something. What occurred that day, right? Because we know it's not a conflict. It's not accurate to call it a war either, religious or otherwise. But we know that what occurred that day, October 7th, 2023, was a tragedy, right? Of that, there's no question. 1,200 people were killed, the abduction of around 200 more, right? But it's not simply that I see as the tragedy. I don't see that as the singular tragedy, as the only tragedy that matters, right? I don't start a book in the middle. It's that the entire loss of life on October 7th, 2023, where 1,200 Israelis died, was completely avoidable. Completely avoidable. It is because of Israel's agenda that has been in action for decades that led to that political moment. At this point, that's no longer in question. We know too much now. And for me, any loss of life is tragic, but it's especially true when it's completely avoidable, right? Everything that's happened in Israel has been the result of Israel. From their foreign policy and how they've treated their allies, or, you know, I was thinking about it. I was about to say how they've treated American allies, but I'm just like, are we even allies? And I mean, I know we are on paper. You know what? This is me having a tangent. Let me go back. Let me stick to, because listen, I'm about to cook. Like, this is one of the, I'm so frustrated with how little momentum, how little change. I'm disgusted. I wake up every day and I just think about Palestinians and everything that we couldn't do and everything that we still can. Right? And the full extent of any tragedy can't be grasped unless you understand, right, how that this has been happening since Israel's founding. But post October 7th, 2023, right? For months, American media just ran segments, endless segments and testimonials from Israeli survivors and family members, right? Israeli leaders. There were urgent and absolute condemnations of Hamas from politicians and pundits alike. There were proclamations of Israel's absolute, quote, right to defend itself, right? Always followed by the promise of swift retribution. So 2 years later, it's essential that we understand what's happened since then, right? And reckon with what to do with what we know. The United States was the first country to recognize the provisional government of the state of Israel, right? This is upon its founding in 1948, which, by the way, what is that? 60-something years old, 70-something years old? This is how young Israel is. It's now one of the top, three? It's in the top 5 military superpowers of the world. How is that possible? Right? American funding. Since 1948, Israel has received hundreds of billions of dollars in U.S. foreign aid, right? This is post the World War II era, right? So on average, Israel's received a minimum of $3 billion a year from the United States. But from October 7th, 2023 to now, the U.S. has given Israel at least $21.7 billion in military aid. That's in 2 years. What is that funding increase, right? 267%, right? This is true while American children go hungry, while people can't pay their bills, while grocery prices skyrocket. We have no antitrust laws, healthcare, SNAP benefits, social services, everything's being slashed, right? And what's that money being used for, by the way? To murder Palestinian people for the crime of being Palestinian. That's what the money is being used for, right? What else has happened in the last 2 years? Well, we've seen the Zionist lobby supercharge its stronghold on American Congress, right? There's been fundraising and spending surges, right? AIPAC, there is not a single foreign entity. I would even argue that there's not even a national one that has more influence over American Congress than AIPAC. So they have significantly boosted their fundraising and spending in those months since October 7th and since then, right? In that first year, it doubled compared to its first 9 months. And what is that money being used for? Targeting politicians. Oh, that's right. Right? They use that money to increase their influence on the 2024 elections. They spent millions to support pro-Israel candidates and unseat those critical of Israel. That's where we saw Cori Bush get ousted. Jamal Bowman get ousted. Right? Those are the same people that we'd argue on the left are part and parcel with the power structures that be, which is very confusing to me. Very confusing to me. But we'll get there. We'll get there, right? They've obviously bolstered more and more support. We've seen an unshakable union between Zionists and white supremacists in America. We've seen the deepening relationship of Zionists and white supremacists in America. That statement makes zero sense. It doesn't make any sense, but that is where we are when we're asked backwards. It's called horseshoe theory, right? When we start to imitate, sound like, look like exactly the thing that we were supposedly against because there is a union here around whiteness. We've seen rampant McCarthyism, right? The censorship of anything, any kind of pushback, any criticism, any reframing, any questioning of Israel's practices. And guess who's been enforcing that on a level unprecedented in my lifetime? The Trump administration, an openly white nationalist, Project 2025, white supremacist sympathizing administration, right? They've got the Supreme Court. They've got the state. They have the Senate, and they've got Congress. They got the House. You know what? What's bothering me is what I'm about to read for you, and also just speak off the cuff about what has happened for Palestinians. So, because let me drink some water. And I'm just like, I was sitting here and I said, why am I having trouble finding my words? And it's because this part matters so little compared to what has happened to Palestinians, right? Like it matters so little. It matters for us because it's how we fight. But I want you to just listen to the impact on Palestinians, right? We know that there's a minimum of 67,000 deaths, right? 67,000 Palestinians have been killed by Israel's onslaught or as a result of Israel's onslaught against them. But what about the living? What's happened to the living, right? The point of Israel's agenda isn't just to remove and displace and destroy Palestinians and their life. It's also to make it so that it destroys the desire to live, right? For those who survived in the Gaza Strip, and I'm just going to really locate this in there, because what we've also seen, what we know has happened, is a massive expansion of Israeli settlements in the West Bank. It's all one gigantic land grab, right? So what about those who survived on the Gaza Strip? 2.1 million Palestinian lives have been completely upended. The entire open-air prison, which is what Gaza has been. It's what Israel created. The Gaza Strip is an Israeli invention in its current form. And not only did they create it to open-air imprison Palestinians, but they also have just obliterated it to make it unlivable, uninhabitable, because even then, even in an open-air prison, the Palestinian life was rich. They want to destroy that, right? So let me break it down, right? The territory's been decimated. In the last 2 years, out of every 10 people, one has been killed or injured in an Israeli strike. This is for Palestinians living in Gaza, right? So 2.1 million Palestinian people, out of every 10 people, one has been killed or injured in an Israeli strike. 9 are displaced. At least 3 have not eaten for days. Out of every 100 children, 4 have lost either one or both parents. Out of every 10 buildings that stood in Gaza pre-war, that's pre-October 7th, 2023, right? 8 are either damaged or flattened. Out of every 10 buildings, 8 are either damaged or flattened. Out of every 10 homes, 9 are wrecked. Out of every 10 acres of cropland, 8 have been razed. And we're talking about more than 3 out of every 4 hectares, right? What has that got to do with Israel defending itself? Roughly 11% of Gaza's population has been killed or injured, right? Cemeteries are overflowing. Graves just line every ounce of the strip. Israeli airstrikes have killed entire families in their home. There have been generations of Palestinians that have been wiped out. I mean, the entire family line. More than 2,000 people seeking food have been killed. And this is according to Gaza's health ministry. In some cases, right, Israel has acknowledged that they've fired shots randomly, right, into crowds of people seeking food for no other reason. They just attempted to get desperately needed aid, which Israel routinely stops them from accessing, right? Israel attacked healthcare facilities, right? Controlled and limited access to medical supplies and entry of new medical supplies, right? Doctors couldn't do their jobs. They couldn't treat people with advanced burns, right? With the rudimentary equipment that they had. And why did they strike hospitals? What did Israel say about that? Oh, yeah, right. Hamas, right? Doesn't matter if there's proof of Hamas. Doesn't matter if Hamas is actually there. It's just, that's what we say. It's just Hamas. What else, right? Journalists. There has been no conflict in history, right, where the amount of journalists, health workers, and UN aid workers have been killed or injured, right? According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, right, and the UN, including the British Medical Journal, they say the prevalence of patients with injuries from explosive in Gaza compares to data on injured U.S. combat forces in Iraq and Afghanistan. These are on the attacks that Israel has perpetrated against the Palestinian people were against the Palestinian people, not against a government, not against an army. There was no battle. They just killed them because they could. That's why that happened. Right? It's taken 2 years of this relentless assault of somehow the Palestinian people, their resilience, their desire to live, their desire to protect their families. Right? It's because of them that we know as much as we know. It's because of everyday people working tirelessly against Israel's massively well-funded propaganda machine propagated by American mainstream media, right? People, regular everyday people, Palestinians have been working against that, against the most well-funded propaganda and military machine in the world, and have been successful enough in doing that. That is an unbelievable task. That's the strength and the might of the Palestinian people. That's the power of the left when we use it well, when we understand our job, right? And because of that relentless desire to live, to protect, to survive, to thrive that Palestinians have, we know now that even Western countries have decided, you know what? Maybe we should recognize and acknowledge Palestine as an independent state, right? That's what they're saying now. United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, they have now recognized Palestine. But look how long it took. And would it happen? Would it happen if a Democrat were sitting in office and was able to package this better? Probably not. There's a lot of nuance and contradiction here, but let me be clear, because what this revealed to me is gut-wrenching. Since October 7th, 2023, we know that a minimum of 67,000 Palestinians have been killed because of Israel's endless attack on Palestinians for the crime of being Palestinian. But what is the measure of a life worth, right? We were now seeing some of these countries acknowledge it. We're now seeing regular people, celebrities, speaking out against it who didn't say anything before. Yes, Israel has a massive propaganda campaign. Yes, it came with maybe a couple of knocks on your career. Did it matter? Knowing what you know now? What if I say it this way, right? 67,000 Palestinians needed to be murdered before some people spoke up, before some countries decided maybe we shouldn't do this. This is after a starvation campaign. This is after the murder of children and families, entire generations wiped out. What is the measure of a life worth? What is the measure of a Palestinian life worth in the Western consciousness and in the American consciousness, right? When 67,000 have to die, right? 1,200 Israelis were killed on October 7th, 2023, right? So if we take that away from the 67,000 that we know it's taken a minimum of 65,800 more Palestinian deaths just to begin to take seriously the matter of genocide, right? You know what that means? That in the American and Western conscious, Palestinian life is worth 1.7%, 1.79% against that of an Israeli's. That's what that means. That is what we're up against. I've studied the moment in the last 2 years the best I can. I've taken everything I know, having been out in the region, having been committed to this struggle for a decade, right? I want to be clear. Because this time is unique for a lot of reasons. But I want to be clear, right? American media has really never spent any length of time talking about Israel or Palestine. It was, some things were default, but we never spent any length of time on it. Oh no, you always got the Israeli framing. But it wasn't very much featured on that. But what changed after October 7th, 2023, right? Is in the promises of retribution you heard over and over again, Netanyahu, right? Who has since then seized control in what can only be called an authoritarian regime in Israel, right? Knocking down the power structures and any checks and balances that exist there. What was the messaging over and over again? What was the promise? What would end the war? What would end the war? Because it wasn't millions of people and tens of millions of people worldwide demanding it, calling for it, protesting against it, right? against the genocide. It wasn't that. Oh, no. What about an arms embargo? No. That's not going to end the war. They were really clear. American media and Israeli media were very, very clear. The only thing that would end this war was the complete eradication of Hamas, right? A war against Hamas had to be waged. But here's my question. What if the war against Hamas was no different than the war on drugs? Right? Nothing more than a placeholder so as not to offend the delicate sensibilities of the American public as to who the real target was all along. Right? There's going to be some parallels here. There's going to be a little bit of history here. There's going to be a little bit about political movements and how all of these things work together. Because if we don't understand this, then we don't win. There is a singular purpose of the war on drugs. There was a singular purpose. I want to be clear about something. Let me just drink a little water. The war on drugs was first named in the 70s, but it was in the 80s and 90s that it really took effect. But it was a reaction to the massive impact of Black radical movements in the United States and anti-war movements in the United States. That's why there needed to be something to ensure that that could never happen again. So the singular purpose of the war on drugs was to devastate Black American communities. The secondary purpose of the war on drugs was to destroy any leftist political momentum, right? Well, Future, how do you know that? Yeah, because I be reading. In 1994, John Ehrlichman, right, was a Nixon advisor. He had an interview. He said point blank, the war on drugs, right, the campaign was intended to target and disrupt Black communities and the anti-war left by associating them with drugs and then criminalizing them. All of this is starting to sound eerily familiar. Let me cook. Right? The story we were told was that America needed to defend itself from criminality, right? That Black people were criminals and drug pushers. That's what we were. So as a result of that, you saw, right? 1986, Anti-Drug Abuse Act, right? It was created. And that's where we started to see an extreme sentencing disparity between crack and powder cocaine, right? Even though they were pharmacologically similar. I would like a point for saying that word right the first time. I have a point. Because so then when I mispronounce a word later, it's disqualified because I said that one so good. Okay? Back to this clear racial disparity. Now, while I'm speaking these things to you, I'm going to draw some parallels around movements and everything else, but I want you to be thinking too. Draw parallels. These are the same playbooks over and over and over again. Israel has used this particular framework, right? And I'm going to really break that down they've used it against Palestinians. It's been used against Israelis who resist the occupation. It's been used against any social justice, anybody all across America, right? And it requires, this is what's important, in every region, in every context, somebody got to be Black for white supremacy to exist the way it needs to, right? That's why there's so much solidarity and there's so much overlap between the people of Palestine and the Pan-African struggle, the global Pan-African struggle. That's why Kwame Ture was talking about it. That's why Malcolm X was talking about it, right? That's why when I go out there, there's Mandela, right? There's an Assata Shakur quote. There's a Tupac quote. There's Angela Davis, because the Black freedom struggle is emblematic of freedom struggles all over the world, right? But if we know that's true, then we are not the only ones. And what you'll find over and over again, and as I'll illustrate, the mere idea, right? The very idea of what we are is so threatening. It's so threatening to the power structure that they want to destroy it at the root. Because the second that we get a little momentum, we win. The second that we do. But let me cook, right? So you have this 1986 Anti-Drug Abuse Act, right? Creates the sentencing disparity, right? The law mandated that a 5-year minimum sentence for possession of just 5 grams of crack cocaine, right, would have the same penalty of just powder cocaine, but 500 grams. So you're going to get the same sentence with 5 grams of crack that you would for 500 grams of cocaine, which is just flat out fucking racist. Okay? But not inherently. It's got to be the application of it. So why don't we talk about that? The ratio that this law and how it was enacted, right? How it was enforced, rather, 100 to 1. That's a lot. That's 100 to 1. The ratio was 100 to 1. That ratio disproportionately affected Black communities, right? Black Americans made up the vast majority of those convicted on crack cocaine. We know that. So what happened? What happened then? An explosion of imprisonment, right? The result, skyrocketing incarceration rates, right? This is especially true for Black men. By 2000, so we go from 1986 to 2000, by 2000, right, the Black incarceration rate had tripled since 1970. Tripled. Went from about 600 people per 100,000 people to over 1,800. And we know that it's just expanded ever since. 1/3 of Black men born in the 2000s, right, were predicted to be imprisoned at some point in their lifetime. Now, what was the effect of that, right? Israel was doing the very same thing to Palestinians over several generations, right? So we have the murder, we have the displacement, we have the land theft, but we also have the imprisonment, which often gets overlooked. So what was the result of this, right? Well, it's very simple. If every Black American is a drug dealer or user or pusher, right, then they deserve whatever happens to them, in the same way that if every Palestinian is Hamas, then every Palestinian must die or be displaced or be imprisoned. Right? If you can't kill them, make it so that they don't want to live anymore. And what's one of the best ways, right, to enforce and enact that? Making sure, right, that no change is possible. And how do you do that? Ensure that they cannot live fully realized lives as citizens. Second, third tier, right? So what happened? What was the impact of this presumed criminality of Black Americans in America? Okay, cool. Yeah, break their families apart, right? This was the objective. Break the families apart, foster psychological and socioeconomic trauma in their children, right? Imprison so many of them that their communities are hollowed out. Make sure, coming out of prison, that they can never be gainfully employed, right? What does that do? It ensures cycles of debt and poverty, right? And then use that presumption of criminality to suppress their rights, take away their right to vote. Create policies that ensure that disenfranchisement continues, right? Suppress dissent. But there's a marked difference in this, right? Marked. Palestine is different for many reasons, like obviously, right? But the key one to take away from here, because I'm sort of illustrating what the war on drugs had, made some reference to, Jim Crow era laws. All of these things are happening simultaneously, but listen to this, right? Israel is the most sophisticated system of apartheid the world has ever seen. Apartheid learns from its failures, right? Apartheid learns from its failures. So the apartheid that learned from America, right? That helped to inform this to this to this. You know what? Why don't I tell you what this is? How about this, right? It should be widely known. It's not. It should be that Nazi legal scholars extensively studied America's Jim Crow laws while formulating their own racial legislation in the 1930s. They were like, ooh, we like how they be doing them over there, right? Hitler's American Model, the United States, and the Making of Nazi Race Law, right? It's a book out there. Yale law professor James Q. Whitman detailed the extensive American influence on Nazi legal thinking. Heinrich Krager's work, a young Nazi lawyer, they were just running around, being honest about what they were back then, right? But Krager was sent to the U.S. to study segregation laws and later published race laws in the United States. His research was cited by the Nazi Ministry of Justice and Influence, the Nuremberg Laws, right? Nazis loved U.S. racism. When international critics were like, hey, Nazi race policies, these should be condemned, Nazi officials simply deflected by pointing to America's own system of segregation and violence, including lynchings, right? But apartheid learns from itself. It studies its failures. So what happened? Because we know Black folks organized. Black folks organized in America and fought for and died for rights. And it wasn't just Black folks. It was everybody that was a thinking, caring person. And the truth is, the vast majority of people simply were not that moved. We don't need the entire country, even the majority of it, to win. But then, what happened? So we got some rights. That's good. We got some rights. What about South African apartheid? So we know that the Nazi practice was the Nazi system of apartheid, right? We know for a fact the Nazi system of apartheid was informed by America's Jim Crow apartheid, right? So let's just move on. What about another system of apartheid we can think of? Okay, South African apartheid, right? So remember, systems of hate are going to study itself. They're like, Black people were able to amass power during the 60s and got their rights back. So we can't let that happen again. Around the same time, you got apartheid in South Africa, right? What was going on there? Okay, cool. The white population was quite small relative to the Black population. Power was concentrated heavily, obviously, in South African apartheid. So white folks, it was vicious, right? Nobody fights like South Africans, like Black South Africans, my God, right? Imprison their leaders, literally annihilated and killed student organizers, right? That's what South Africans did. So what happened is they used a national campaign and then an international campaign. That's what organizers did in South Africa. And that was one of the first BDS campaigns that we saw. And it was effective. Oh my God, it was so effective because South Africa relied on its imports and exports to survive. Its economy was completely reliant on it, right? So when the world ostracized South Africa for its treatment of its African population, I'm skipping a lot of steps, but indulge me, apartheid ended. The economy simply could not sustain itself. It didn't end because it was the right thing to do. It ended because Black South Africans were just better. They fought better. They fought smart. They won. It was never going to be handed. And the world participated, but they wouldn't participate on their own. Oh no, that injustice had been going on for decades, generations. But they did because that's how strategic South Africans were. But, right? Okay, so systems of hate are like, So it's not just about the murder and imprisonment and all this other stuff. Okay, cool. We can't need money, right? Because here's the thing that's gross. Because I've wondered this. Why keep Black people in America? They're so hated. Why? Right? There was a point in time in Garvey's generation where there's a Back to Africa movement. Because Garvey was just that guy. He was a bulldog. He was chocolatey as hell. And he was able to compel and move massive crowds. But he was saying, we should go back. We should go back to Africa. And the KKK loved that. They would talk. Keep it. But here's the thing. All those years in, you kind of need Black folks for their economic contributions, right? American capital wouldn't exist without chattel slavery. And then when you are looking at the prison economy that came out of that post, the abolition of slavery and vagrancy laws, right? A lot of labor was done. So much labor was done by just imprison black people instead of enslaved ones. They just changed the laws to make it make sense. So apartheid had to look at itself and say, okay, we can't need them for money. We got to need them for nothing. And here we are at Israeli apartheid, which is a term I'm not hearing enough. I'm not hearing Israeli apartheid enough. I'm hearing genocide, and I know it was a fight for us to be able to make that word mainstream. But it still feels too passive, like a genocide is simply just happening. No, there is a perpetrator of it, and it is Israeli apartheid, right? And that lends to the two things that make this so incredibly different, right? So unbelievably different than any other apartheid we've ever seen, right? Israelis do not need the economy, the literal economic value that Palestinians would generate. They just need the land. They want the land to do it themselves. But the second reason is the one that's just really disgusting. Just think about that though, right? Oh, if we don't need you, then we can just literally eradicate you. We want your land. We don't care about the land. We will burn the land to ash rather than let you grow things like food on it. Anything native there is seen as some sort of assault on the Western sensibilities that inform Israeli life and culture, because that's where most of them come from, right? So if you don't need the Palestinian population to be alive, you actually need them gone so you can steal the land and their homes without having to, you get genocide. And that is the other thing that makes Israeli apartheid the most sophisticated system of apartheid the world has ever seen. Now, why don't they need the economy? Right? Why not use Palestinians to grow food? Because we pay Israel's bills. Because American dollars pay Israel's bills. That's why. So as the education programs and after school programs and every resource that does any good in society, right? Well, that's being gutted here, right? Everything is being built in Israel. They don't need Palestinian economy because they're getting American dollars for free. So what do we do with what we know? There was a secondary thing that I brought up, right? On the war on drugs. And that was to shut down leftist political movement in the U.S., right? So Nixon and all those hoes. Look at my nose going red. I'm going to have a little sip of water here. I cooked. I hope you're eating, because this is where we got to lock into. We got to lock in here. Okay? Because I'm drawing these parallels. Oh, the parallels. So Nixon, all those hoes, like, how do I know? They said it was about the war on drugs, but was it really about? I did a little research because I be knowing stuff, but sometimes you got to really know stuff, right? You got to really know stuff. The war on drugs. How does that relate to leftist movements? Okay, so Nixon, first of all, CIA, they're like, oh yeah, we're about the war on drugs. So then, but yet the CIA directly funded and protected the Contras, right? That was a rebel Nicaraguan group that actively trafficked cocaine into the U.S., right? Now, why? Now, this is fact. This is fact, right? This is available in books. This is cited from bibliographies. This is a fact. The CIA, while saying that they were invested in and attacking and fighting in the war on drugs, right, to protect American citizens, were actually funding a group that were largely responsible for trafficking massive amounts of cocaine into the United States, right? And why? Well, here's your fact. Because they were more concerned with fighting communism than they were preventing drug trafficking. You see, Nicaragua had a socialist party, right? That's why they were doing, because the idea of us, if the world starts to figure out If the world starts to figure out what quality of life people have or could have with the right socialist practices and policies in play, with the kind of democratic socialism, right, that doesn't allow wealth hoarding, that doesn't allow these like massive mergers that eradicate our quality of life, that have checks and balances on power, right, that reinvests its an economy and its people, that is serious about educating its people. Oh, if we found out about that, it's game over. And in fact, as we're learning, right, in this moment, I'm going to grab my laptop 1 second. I got to slide over, right? Forgot to pull this up. But as we're learning, hold on, y'all. I had to cook for a second. I got a little dog on me. He's 2.5 pounds. He has schizophrenia. And he's so hot that he's making me hot. Like his body temperature is just, he never is warm enough. But I want to go back to this, right? So they want to fight communism, right? And not in that fucked up, the communism, and not Russian communism. That's not what we're talking about, right? I'm not talking about that. No. They want to fight an actual democratically elected population. The population of Nicaragua said, we want the Sandinista National Liberation Front, right? And again, this is not me saying these entities are perfect, okay? Like you create political discord, right? There's going to be bad actors everywhere. It's that these initiatives and these parties are set up to fail, largely by America. By the way, Noam Chomsky has a great work on the extent to which America over generations has destabilized all of South America, right? So it's funny because in this moment when we hear nothing but all these migrants trying to come, nobody wants to leave their home. Nobody. They do because the conditions have become so untenable that their home has become so unrecognizable. I mean, the starvation campaigns and everything, that has a lot to do with American foreign policy, if not everything, right? America's ability to find and corrupt leadership, to destabilize any kind of socialist level movement, right? That would help the people wake up. So what are some of the economic and social programs in the 1980s that the Sandinista National Liberation Front was able to do? What made it so dangerous? What made them so dangerous in another country that the CIA decided that they were going to just let drugs roll in so they could destabilize this random democratically elected political body, right? Nicaragua's democratic leadership. What was the thing that was so scary? Literacy campaigns. Okay. The National Literacy Crusade of 1980, right? Mobilized thousands of young people. They were learning how to read, and they were also teaching people how to read and write in rural areas. So how do we know it was effective? Okay, great question. It reduced, this singular campaign, reduced the country's overall illiteracy rate from 50.3% to just 12.9% in 5 months. That's how effective it was. It also demonstrates a real desire to learn. Oh, but there's nothing scarier to fascism and authoritarianism than a thinking, intelligent people, right? The effort was so impactful that it was recognized with a UNESCO Literacy Award. Okay, what about healthcare improvements, right? The Sandinista government invested heavily in expanding healthcare access, right? Especially for poor people and people in rural areas, right? How impactful was that initiative, right? Because we constantly hear about the failures of socialist programs and democratic socialism, right? So what about that one? Well, the World Health Organization, right, based on that initiative alone, decided to name Nicaragua a, quote, model nation in health attention in 1983. What about, okay, well, sir, they're learning to read and they're healthier, but is their economy getting better? Right? Because isn't that what socialists are against? Great question. Well, we saw agrarian reform, right? So the Sandinista government, this is the Socialist Democratic Party, nationalized land held by the Somoza family and its allies. That means, okay, think of that as standing for a rich person that is greedy and nasty, right? Take that from them. Too much. You got too much. We can't be touching on this, but we got too much, right? And what happened? They redistributed it to landless peasants and agricultural cooperatives. So what was the impact of that? By 1990, more than 40% of productive land had been redistributed by the agrarian reform. This boosted social economy, right? Not just that, policies nationalize banks. So that was a huge step, nationalizing banks, and focus on developing co-ops and state-owned enterprises. This helped Nicaragua become 90% self-sufficient in food by the late 2010s. That's why we are so dangerous. But think about the extent to which America was willing to they're like, no, bring the drugs in, right? We're going to say we're fighting a war on drugs, but it's a war on black people. And then we're going to help funnel the drugs into America, right? And we're going to use that to stop any progress in Nicaragua and attack any socialist democratic entity. For what? For what? It's the very idea of us. We are living and experiencing the same playbook and the same blueprint, right? The playbook that uses pernicious and insidious anti-black racism, right? To normalize criminality of darker skinned people or whoever is black in that context, right? And using that to attack every black person, white person, Asian person, woman, trans person, gay, man, it doesn't matter. Every leftist that there is. Because we already know the impacts of racism and what that's used for. But the secondary goal is always to destroy our political movements. And they use the exact same playbook every single time. It is this very playbook that Israel and America utilized in the media coverage around Israel and Palestinians, right? It was used to justify Palestinian death and murder. They're the criminals. They're all Hamas. They're terrorists. Because you add that little Muslim salt on the bread and you got yourself a terrorist, right? Thank you, Islamophobia. And it is essential that we recognize this playbook. There has always been a vested interest in using racism to attack and dismantle any leftist movement. It is the very blueprint. Like American racism is the blueprint for Nazism. What? Oh, maybe then. And Nazism has become the blueprint for Israeli apartheid against Palestinians. And it was anti-black racism that led to the expansion of the prison state and inflated police budgets that also take food out of people's mouths, right? That's now led to brown people getting swept up on the street along with just about everybody else simply for being brown and put in detention centers because we see an expansion of the nation of this. Oh, and you know what? Oh, don't forget, your popular vote doesn't matter. Your popular vote doesn't matter, right? Because of the Electoral College. And what caused that? Oh, anti-black racism. I guess we could call it that. Yeah, because it was a concession that was given to the South because they wanted to keep their slaves. It's almost as if, I might sound crazy. It's almost as if we actually have to take the matter of racism very seriously for once across the left, right? Not just black folks. And again, I wish it was anything else. Ooh, if I was a white man. If I was a white man. No, they already would have took my ass out. But y'all would be listening. That's not true. You'll be listening anyway. I truly am irresistible. Like, that's the point. And I'm not saying that because I'm ego tripping. Tony Cade Bombara said, right? The role of the artist is to make revolution irresistible. And I don't necessarily think I'm an artist. But I know my job is to make the revolution irresistible. We need to understand how we have failed here, right? As the left. And I want to be clear about something. That doesn't mean the fight's over. Not even fucking close. Not even close. In fact, we have a mandate to win. Palestinians don't have a choice. They fight to survive, to protect their culture, their identity, their children, their generations, their land, their homes. Everywhere that I went in Palestine, there was some kind of reference to keys, right? It was there over an arc, in an archway. Is that how you say it? Archway? Damn it. Well, there was the point, okay? We're even now. Because there's like, and they still have, so many Palestinians that I met still had keys to the homes that they had been tossed out of by Israeli settlers. Because they know that someday, one day, they'll return home. So we don't get to say, well, we tried and it didn't work. How boring. How silly. How frivolous. No, we study and we get smarter and better. I admit, just along with the vast majority of people on the left, I did not quite fully comprehend in 2023 that Palestine was, more than anything else, a policy issue. I too saw it as so incomprehensibly evil, right? That it led to ethical and moralistic calls to action. And we marched on the streets and we said, hey, government, don't do this. This is bad. Stop this. It didn't work because we didn't build power, right? And then you had a subset of people on the left and they said, I could never vote for Kamala Harris. The right and the left are the same and none of it makes a difference to Palestinians. But it did, and it does. And I could tell you, like I have in other episodes, and I'll continue to remind you how precedent was broken in 2016 with the Trump administration and how that broken precedent has continued since and led to a dramatic increase in abuse and violence, that it supercharged the genocidal agenda. And some of you who just found out about what was going on in October 7th, 2023 had a lot of opinions, but I didn't see you in the fight before then. See, I was out there in 2016. I saw those changes. I saw what happened with the Trump administration. This doesn't mean that the Democratic establishment is not fucking rotten to its core. It's that we decided that waxing poetic on morality was more important than winning. And we weren't honest about why we were losing. And it was because we simply did not have the political power or might to win. And people died because of it. Now, that's not an exact science. Every single apparatus of power in this country is positioned against us. But look what we have accomplished as a left over time, even still. That's how good we are when we fight to win. When we implement a Black liberation theory, when Black people are active participants and leaders of the movement along with everybody else. When y'all fight without, you lose. You don't win. We don't win. And when we fight without you, we don't either. It looks way better and sounds way better, smells better too. Oh my God. When it's just us. But that buy-in, that solidarity, right? Identity can and even should be your entry point into social consciousness, but it shouldn't be your exit. We should be bound by the same set of beliefs, or enough of them that we can get the fuck on with it. We're all too caught up in identity, and that too is a construction of that is so Americana to its core. We simply have to be more strategic. We did the same fucking thing. It's what broke up BLM in 2016, right? And again, what has this group of people who constantly say they're the same, it's the same type of evil, what body of work do they have? I am a lurker. I live on the internet. I also read just about everything you can imagine. I stay informed. It's not there. It's not there. Go ahead and look. It's not there. Right? So from here on in, we study their blueprint. We make our own playbook, the one that's been winning for us for the past 70 years, and actually fight to protect the rights that people fought and died for so that we can fight better for Palestinians somewhere else that are being murdered by dollars taken out of our bank accounts. They can't eat my morality. My morality is not a shield for people in Palestine being fucking annihilated by Israeli bullets with American stamps on them. It might take us 10 years. It's still worth the goddamn fight because it's 10 years of fighting or 10 years of laying down pretending that we're dead while Palestinian people actually die. So we'll be fighting differently this time, and we'll be smarter, and we'll be better. But the fight continues and must continue. Have you noticed that you haven't really still seen black folks out on the street yet? That's when you'll know. That's when you'll know, because we're studying this new political landscape while they stress test this authoritarian regime in America, stress test the system. We too are studying the political landscape. Make sure you're ready when the call comes. Because before you can say fascism, people don't believe black folks in America just the same way they don't believe women. They don't believe this. They don't believe left. So you got to make sure you have the body of proof. Even Ezra's got to say, well, this shit ain't right. You get rid of you fight on every conceivable field. You don't abstain because it's icky. You fight to fucking win, and the fight is dirty, right? Political power. We can fight in every way. You want to be a grassroots organizer? Be a grassroots organizer. I think that's dope as hell. It's essential. Also, you should probably start volunteering because nobody's doing that shit anymore. Go and get you in a food bank. Give some blood, right? We're service workers first. Read, study, all the things, right? And some of us, right? Probably not me if I'm keeping it a buck. I'm joking. I'll be helping. But, that's fighting for electoral justice projects is not my passion project. I know. But stop obstructing it. Stop shooting yourself in the foot, shooting us in the foot, and then demanding that we run. And for the love of God, stop being so fucking annoying. Get you on Canary Mission's list before you start telling people they don't know what they're talking about. Right? There is space for every kind of work here, but it's got to be every kind of work. And we keep eating our own and attacking our own and policing our own and being shitty to our own, and we're not useful. We're not useful to each other, and we're certainly not useful to people all over the world, right? But in Palestine in particular. So this has been our 2 years. 2 years. What we've seen is the consolidation of power on the right. Fully realized. We only have 2 jobs on the left, just 2. Right? Only 2. Build power. That seems to be a thing. Not just critique it, build power, and stop the consolidation of power on the right. Do you see the extent and the lengths that the American government, right, and all their little Nazi players, do you see the extent to which they will go to destroy the idea of any kind of public good, of socialist democratic good? Right? Of any kind of black leadership. Do you see the extent of that they are willing to take to stop the consolidation of our power? If you sound like them, you are not ready to join the movement yet. You need to read some more and go get you some therapy. If you walk into these social justice spaces and you're offended because your emotional needs aren't there, it's not about your emotion aren't being met. It's not for you. We have an agenda to meet. There's work to be done. Go get you some therapy and then come back. If you're one of these people that's like, it's not my job to educate you, you're in the wrong job. Get out of here. Go read you some books or get therapy or go do some other kind of work. And you can still do good work, but enough with the nonsense. All I hear is the hyper individualist American weird shit that I came into. I'm like, whoa, what happened here? But it makes sense. Even still, the best and the brightest that I have ever come across, right? There's a deep concentration of those folks here. My concern is that I may have already met our best, and my job and our job is to train us up, so that's not true anymore. So that's a whole rant. This fight is ours to win, and it is a win that is full of holes and scars and death. But I don't want to ever look back at this time and talk about one of the greatest injustices that has ever, right, happened in our generation and know that I didn't do everything I possibly could. I can't look Palestinian friends that I have in the eye ever again if we don't do the work that is required of us. This is our generational fight. We're in the great battle of beliefs. And when we're asked what we did 5 years from now, 10, 15, 20, we are going to have an answer that we're proud of. That's a fucking fact. So here is our, the 2-year mark. We can't unknow what we know. And now it's time to decide what we're going to do with what we know. And we're going to fight. That's it. It's just that simple, right? Fuck Van Jones and his stupid little pimp purple jacket, making jokes about babies, right? That's when we're reaching a point where we should be embarrassed as the left. It is time for us to build power. When that bald bitch is running around thinking it's acceptable to make jokes when he was actually a fucking hero on the left in the early aughts. That's what the Democratic establishment can do to you. Don't make any mistake about my relationship to the rot that is that system. We just need to play it smart. And we need to be strategic. Palestine is a policy issue. We have not done well on the left when it comes to fighting policy. Foreign policy specifically. That is actually what I wanted to say with that, because we'd be fighting policy all the time. But foreign policy, we suck. In the same way that we've been ineffective against gentrification. There's only 2 areas where we really don't win. So leave our generational mark. Fuck Netanyahu. Fuck ICE. Fuck Nazis. Fuck the Trump administration. Fuck Stephen Miller, that bald gremlin-faced bitch. And J.D. Vance, that couch fucker. Look at me. I'm trying to be like I amp myself up, but now I don't know how to come down. My nose is so red. But no, here's the thing. It's because I'm fired up. I am fired up. We have every single thing to gain right now. We are against the fucking ropes, and we fight best off the goddamn ropes, don't we? So it's time. It's time. Okay. That's it. I want to say thank you so much, to producer Corey, to Wit, who just makes the things look great. Corey, who somehow managed to wrangle me into a more linear way of delivering information. And I want to say thank you to each and every one of you. This is an impossibly difficult moment in time. And there's going to be more. But our counter narrative, the stories, the wins, the battles ahead, that's what changes history. That's when we win. So to anyone out there that's just like, despondent, I understand, but we're coming. The movement is coming. It is. And this time we're going to play to win. So I love you all so much. And I'll see you on the next episode. Free Palestine.